Hello, and welcome back to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning. If you are new to the podcast, I'm your host, Dr. Karen Wilson. Today, I am joined once again by two passionate advocates for educational equity and justice, Vickie Brett and Amanda Selogie from the Inclusive Education Project. You may remember Vickie and Amanda from a previous episode where we discussed IEPs, inclusion, and the legal landscape for students with learning differences. Today's conversation is an important one, especially for our listeners in the United States. But I want to acknowledge our international audience as well. We're diving into events currently unfolding in the U.S., specifically the growing threats to the Department of Education, the dismantling of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. We're diving into events currently unfolding in the U.S., specifically the growing threats to the Department of Education, the dismantling of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and how these political shifts are directly impacting students with disabilities, particularly those with learning and mental health challenges. As a neuropsychologist, I witness every day how access to appropriate educational services can change the course of a child's life. And as efforts gain momentum to eliminate federal oversight, roll back funding, and weaken civil rights protections, we need to examine what's at stake, not just for individual families, but for entire communities and the future of education itself. So join me in welcoming Amanda and Vickie to this conversation.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Vickie and Amanda, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
I am so grateful for you being here. For the listeners, we had an issue with our technology. We actually tried to record this probably a month ago now, but it's actually better that we had to re-record because there's so much going on. We want to talk about what's happening with the Department of Education and other legal issues that are impacting children with IEPs, 504 plans, children with learning disabilities. So I cannot wait to jump into this conversation to hear from you both about what is happening, what we should be concerned about, and what do we do during this time. I think when we first reached out, it was just 3 months after the executive order came in that was signed to dismantle the Department of Education. And there have been a number of things that have happened since then. Do you want to start by letting us know where we are right now? And then we can talk about how it's impacting students with learning difficulties, learning disabilities, and go from there.
Sure. So a very brief summary. The executive order attempts to dismantle the Department of Education, but it essentially can't go anywhere because it essentially says to Linda McMahon, the Secretary of Education, and the Department of Education to do anything within its power to close the department. Well, neither of them have the authority to do so. It requires acts of Congress. We have a number of federal education laws that outline how our education system operates, how it's implemented, including the IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. There have been a number of bills in the past few months that have been introduced by congressional Republicans to effectively do what Trump tried to do in his executive order. This has happened in the past, too, over the last 10 years. The problem with those and why we haven't really been scared of those is they're very vague, they're not really actionable, and those new changes, new laws, or changing existing laws would require 60 votes to pass, which means a bunch of Democrats are going to have to flip and agree to it. And there's not really any reality right now that we know of where that's going to move forward. But in the reconciliation bill and what's being called Trump's skinny budget right now, that is currently going through the House, what the congressional Republicans are trying to do is a whole bunch of chaotic wreckage to the Department of Education. The two main components are tying IDEA funds to parental rights laws, essentially school districts that don't go forward with the anti-DEI campaign could potentially lose their funds. And the second piece is creating block grants, essentially taking a number of the IDEA, special education, after-school programs, mental health, and lumping it into one big sum that would allow districts to have wider discretion. Just this morning, we found out that the bill did not advance through committee. 5 Republicans flipped as of this morning, and did not allow this bill to go forward to a full vote. And just to kind of compare to the 60 votes needed, this bill reconciliation would only require 51 votes. So it's much more feasible. But if we can get some Republicans like they did this morning to flip, we have some stance. So that's it in a nutshell where we are.
Okay.
Right.
And there's been a lot of fear about what this means. And because there's been so much going on and so much change, families wonder about their children who have IEPs, who have 504 plans, and deeply concerning for people who think that changes, and even if you can't officially dismantle, if you fire half the people that work there, what does that mean for efficiency, right? What does that mean for the efficiency of the department? And will that dramatically deepen existing inequities in education? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with the Department of Education, the entire premise is to have federal oversight. I would love to believe, even as a Californian, that California, will do what is right and in the best interest of children. But our jobs exist in the state of California because at the local level, that's not happening. And so, we've heard advocates testify in front of Congress and say, look, the Department of Education keeps the honest states honest and the ones that are trying to waver off back on track. And so the illusion of providing, we're going to give educational rights back to the states is just that, an illusion. And to, have a department that has been in existence for decades and to just believe that we can just get rid of it and things will kind of maintain is such it's such lunacy that at the local level, what we are telling our clients is to maintain evidence, is to be more involved at the IEP level, right? To hold those IEP meetings. I had a client just the other day, she is an attorney, and she had said, you know what, I actually want to start taking out of the IEP anything about just them, updating the team about like, oh yeah, so-and-so will take his medication, his ADHD medication outside of school because she's afraid of the implications from what's been going on with the Department of Health and things like that. So anyway, but all that is to say that, there is a real fear because it is not in anyone's best interest, let alone children with disabilities, children of color, to have the department just completely go away.
Right. And doesn't the Department of Education administer Title I and IDA funding?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's a lot that the Federal Department of Education does. And what I think where there's a lot of miscommunication and misinformation out there is that a lot of people in different states who are criticizing the Department of Education, and rightly so, we do as well, the things that they're criticizing is actually already left up to the state. The curriculum that your district uses, the tenure protections, the salaries of your teachers, where the money goes to a certain extent in the general pool of funds, all of those things are already set by school districts, are already given to the states. So this premise that we want to give it back to the states because we want you guys to be able to, it's all a lie. It's all meant to try to get people on their side, when in reality, the Federal Department of Education doesn't do any of that. So eliminating it all it does is take away a number of protections. The federal Department of Education is supposed to ensure that there is not discrimination. And part of what's already happening is the demolishing of the Office of Civil Rights, who handles discrimination claims.
And so, oversight is a massive one, but funding as well. Again, it's oversight. The Department of Education's need to continue to function and provide guidance. Last time we talked about Dear Colleague letters, providing technical assistance, research, technical assistance to states and districts. And, quite frankly, a phone call from, the Office of Civil Rights that works under the Department of Education to ensure that a child, and this is one of the stories that our advocacy group has shared with us, one phone call from them when the child with cerebral palsy was not given transportation to be able to go, was taken care of, pre-Trump. And we have thousands of these stories, even for our veterans who were fell to the mercy of the predatory colleges like ITT Tech. It was the Department of Education that had an investigation, if you will, of, how are we going to rectify this? So it's not just special needs kids that we're talking about here. We are talking about the education for all of our children, for all of us. And I think that that's getting lost. I think that a lot of people thinking, well, this will just go over, SPED stuff will just go over to, the Department of Health. They should be dealing with it. No. They do not have the expertise nor the technical structure to be able to handle these matters.
And when we look at the funding, it's interesting because the people who support the demolishment of the federal Department of Education live in states where they are more dependent on the federal dollars. So there are calculators online, and we can provide it for your listeners, that calculate how much federal dollars come into different states. And I'll tell you, it's a lot less in California than it is in deep red states. So who's going to be impacted? Not a lot of the blue states, but even in the blue states, and why we are still, very afraid is because it's still over $1 billion in California. So we're not talking about and the misnomer is that a big chunk of education funds comes from the states. Yes. But we are still talking about large sums of money that still come from the federal Department of Education and the federal government. And the reality is that this money is already promised via Congress. We have statutes that schools and states and school districts are saying, we want this funds. We will agree to abide by these laws in exchange for these funds. So what happens when, yes, the laws still exist, right? The IDEA hasn't changed, ADA, Section 504, those bills have not changed, and they have bipartisan support. But when school districts are saying, we're supposed to abide by these, but we're not getting the funds, you better believe that that's going to cause huge problems and huge chaos.
Yes, yes. And that's such a big piece. I mean, there's the oversight that we talked about, but again, with over $33 billion allocated to support low income and students who receive special education services, I mean, these programs aren't optional. Sometimes they're the only pathway for a free and appropriate public education for students. And if that funding disappears, it seems that the gap between students with and without support will widen so significantly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, this is part of what the Republicans are trying to do in the reconciliation bill right now. And it gets complicated because we do have the funding structure from the IDEA, but every time the IDEA is reauthorized and every time our fiscal budget is reauthorized, there are certain what they call discretionary funds. So, the IDEA promises certain services for students on an individual basis, right? But there are funding structures that have discretionary funds to support, and there's 18 different programs, but including mental health after school programs that have been considered this discretionary. So they're not written into the actual IDEA itself, but they're written in kind of like as an after thing. And this current reconciliation is attempting to put all of those in one. So saying that no longer are schools and districts required to spend this portion of that fund for mental health or this portion of the fund towards after school program. It's here you go, do what you will. And we know that when left to their own devices, as Vickie said, many states do not use it for their intended purposes.
Mm-hmm. What could that mean that parents, for example, who are seeking an IEE there may not be funding for that, or they may not be funding for mental health services because those funds have been used for something else?
Well, so like here's another kind of real life example that our network has shared with us from San Diego County, from the school district there that had Charting My Path for Future Success. And it was a grant provided by the Department of Education for this particular school district and many other school districts to help those children that, would be either, graduate, at 18, right? Graduating from high school, but still needed, the support vocationally from 18 to 22 here in California. And, as the child, he's 17, he's getting ready to graduate. He's having kind of suicidal thoughts about like, I can't get a job. I won't get a job. And then the school district presented, hey, we have this program. And, he was excited about it all this school year. And then in February, the funding got taken away. The grant was no longer something that aligned with the Department of Education. And it's like, okay. And so this is in California, the real impact of not necessarily, the funding that, Amanda and I are seeing that has been that way, that is outlined specifically, but we are seeing the impact of these kind of outside of what the law specifically states being pulled away. And that is the impact. And those are the stories that need to be shared because we are still living in a world where there is rule of law that is making its way through the courts. But I think that, if people think, oh, well, then it's fine, don't worry about it. But that's why we need to bring awareness to what is actually happening, because a lot of it is look over here, while, a lot of the children are suffering.
Yeah. And one of the grants that is up to the Supreme Court now, but talking about the grants to support teacher shortages from COVID. And so there was a blanket stop on these grants that we know across the board, there are huge teacher shortages, not just teachers, but aides and staff. I mean, the amount of times in the last even just year, I've had conversations with teams where they're like, yeah, we think this child needs an aide. But I'm going to be honest with you, we've been having a lot of trouble, right? Because in the past, school districts would offer, a very low salary for certain positions. And so they're not really getting hits on their application. And so the grants were meant to try to up that, to make it more enticing for people to apply for these jobs. And now that's going away. So that's of concern. And there's actually a Supreme Court case right now that is looking at whether a charter school, a religious school can become a charter school. And it's in Oklahoma. And it's very nuanced, specific to Oklahoma in a sense, but the implications are huge because if allowed this school to become a charter school and use public funds, the implications on giving more wide discretion to states to say which schools can be charter schools and where we can send our funds, because now we can then give them to religious institutions and all of this. And, there's a whole conversation we can have about this case, but just thinking about the implications if we are already giving more power to the states with regards to funding and these discretionary funds, and then we have these over here, it creates so much chaos and so much unknowns. And when we talk about like the protections that children have to have a public education, the same applies for voucher programs, right? That we are no longer ensuring these protections if we are willy-nilly throwing money to wherever certain people want.
Right. And I feel like the chaos and the confusion is creating a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear,
course, yeah.
and a lot of worry for parents, because the examples you gave about, these programs, these grants that fund these programs that are so important for students in school, transitioning out of school, who are in need of support, in need of aides, or in need of speech and language therapists, OT in the classroom. And if we don't have funding to support them, and to meet their needs, what does that happen to them? Because we already have so many kids who fall through the cracks, who are not identified, who don't get the support they need. And it just feels like so many of the changes that, that we're waiting to hear about that are in the courts right now affect children with disabilities. And then you add a discussion about diversity, equity, inclusion, and how that's become a bad word all of a sudden. And those initiatives also impact students with disabilities who we want included. We want equity for them as well. But the dismantling or I'm trying to think of a nicer word. There's not really a nice word to say that.
No.
The demonization of DEI.
Of course, yeah.
It's really going to impact historically marginalized communities the most.
Absolutely. It used to be school to prison pipeline. It's preschool to prison pipeline now.
Oh, goodness.
Preschool to prison pipeline. That is where we are at. Whether, Trump existed or not, is definitely not making it any better for children that absolutely need the help. And when Amanda and I first started, 15 years ago, we would say, to more of the conservative people that we spoke to, wouldn't you like it if a child who had the potential to become a productive member of society, to work as a member in this society, to, be independent, to be on their own, to pay taxes, rather than have them get public assistance? And quite frankly, one of my cousins on the spectrum, and he's almost 30 now, which is unbelievable. But at the time when I would say this, he could have been very capable to have his own job. Instead, he will be on public assistance from 18 to 90. He'll probably outlive us all. Now tell me, between that and, ages 3 to 22, where we could not only provide additional specialized instruction for him and many other children, why wouldn't we spend that money there in that shorter amount of time? Why would we not do that? And the illusion again of, Trump saying, well, it's a parent right. Most of the parents that we know don't even know special education law exists as a law. There needs to be, for people to really have a choice, they need to be informed. And I'm going to tell you right now, a lot of people are not informed. And so this illusion, and again, to talk about money and budgeting and things like that, is this whole kind of premise of, we got to get these vouchers. We got to get these vouchers going so that, look, that immediately guts and takes away the rights and protections that the IDEA offers to a student and a family when they are in a public setting, because that does not apply in a private school. Then you have rising costs. You think, the $5,000 voucher you're going to get, or whatever amount it's going to be, is going to have the same weight in this economy with these tariffs at a private school that doesn't even have to provide specialized programming at all for your child. It is an illusion. You need to take, what is it, the red pill? What was it in the Matrix? I mean, I think we are kind of focused on this recording about the money, because it seems to me that people listen when we talk about the money, and the way in which we were trying to explain DEI, how it impacts its equal access, not just for these special populations of students, which everybody can fit into one of these. Yes. It is equal access to education for all students.
Every single thing that has happened since Trump's inauguration has been in effect to help rich white men. Period. That's it. No other population will benefit from any action that's being taken and that will be taken by the current administration. And anybody who's listening to this who thinks, oh, but I heard this and it's going to help me, it's not. It's absolutely not. Because unless you have the money to afford private school, in which you're already there, you're already there. Mm-hmm. Every single kid in public school right now will be impacted by these actions. End of story. Every single state that has tried voucher programs has failed. Every single one. There's not a single success story of a voucher program working. Like, we know this. But this is what they're banking on. They're banking on lack of education, lack of knowledge. They want to attack education systems because they don't want kids to become educated, because they want the next generation to be dumb and uninformed. That's what they're banking on. And so in talking about like we're all doom gloom, right? And we always want to say, what do we do? And I will tell you, the reason why these 5 Republicans flipped is because they heard from their constituents. Now,
that's what we need to do.
Yeah. So a big reason they flipped is because part of this is guts to Medicaid. And so that is a big driver, but they want to hear about education too. And so we're telling people the best power you have is to contact your representatives, but not just your federal representatives, your state representatives too. States have power in this. There's so many lawsuits that are happening by governors of many different states that they're hearing from their constituents, state legislatures, and even your local school districts. If school districts and county departments of education, state department of education fight back and people fight back, they're hearing from it. So there is a lot of power in federal, but also the local level.
Right. And sharing that with your grandparents who live in Florida, or your, aunts and uncles, cousins who live in another state. And because like you're saying, it impacts everyone, right? It impacts everyone. And obviously, depending on the state you live in, there's a greater impact on you. But, you've said so many important things, since we started this conversation. But, the idea that this is impacting all of us, in some way, shape, or form is so critical. And that I think that there's a tendency for people when when a lot of information is thrown at you and you don't know what's happening, which is the situation right now, which people would often say it's by design. You just kind of want to just give up. There's nothing I can do. But
of course, yeah.
But there are things that you can do. And already before this all started, parents didn't know a lot of their rights when their kids are struggling, because I've always said I've never seen a school website that says, if you are requesting an IEP, click this box. Here's the process. You have to dig and search and find someone to help you through that process. They make it hard. Because they really do. They make it really difficult. And then there's the whole idea of DEI, which you talked about. And I think it's so important to mention that it's not just about race and gender. When you're thinking about DEI, it's about neurodiversity. It's about mental health. It's about learning differences. And if we defund and dismantle and demonize DEI, we're erasing the protection that allow all kids to thrive, regardless of their background.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, in your work with the Inclusive Education Project, you also advocate for early intervention. You talked about the preschool to prison pipeline, which, I've been talking about that preschool age because it's such a critical age, and we expel more students with behavioral and learning challenges from preschools because we don't understand why they're exhibiting those behaviors and why they're struggling. And rather than seeking to understand, we expel them and we kick them out of preschools. And that act is not intervention. Expelling a kid is not intervention. It's not seeking to understand. And the fear, again, we're coming back to funding, but eliminating federal support for early childhood education, Head Start programs. What do you foresee the impact of that?
So in the version of the reconciliation bill before the one that is going through right now, Head Start was actually taken out completely. I actually just had a local planning council meeting where we were talking about this, and in the most recent skinny budget, it's been brought back in. But what we've seen is that the funding is just leveled off. It has not accounted for rises in inflation, all the other impacted. So it actually still is a cut. Now, we know that for some reason, RFK Jr. has taken Head Start under his wing recently to say that he wants to protect it. Now, is he really protecting it with everything else he's doing and an autism registry? I would say no. But as it stands right now, it is included in this bill as to not cut the program. But, anything can happen. Anything can change. It could be taken out tomorrow. But also I will say is that Head Start is not enough. It really isn't. It doesn't reach as many, like they do so much, but they unfortunately can't reach everything and all the supports. Here in California, we have now universal TK. Starting next school year, the 25-26 school year, every single 4-year-old in the state of California is guaranteed a spot in a TK program, no matter what their birthday age. And there's gonna be movement towards a 3-year program for low-income families and students with special needs, starting in a couple of years. But this is California, where California has been more progressive. And even here, early intervention still isn't doing enough. It's still not catching enough. And so other states where they're not even on track to even get anywhere near this, Head Start only scratches the surface.
Right. And that is one of, you talked about the path, I think it was the Pathways program. It's one of a number of programs. It seems like we should be expanding those programs rather than considering cutting them. The other thing is that we also have the National Center for Education Statistics, and that's reliable data. We make decisions based on data. We don't base it on what someone believes should be good for people.
Yeah.
When we can't track disparities, when we can't identify need, when we can't build accountability through evidence-based data, it feels like we're flying blind. And when we're trying to decide how to serve the most vulnerable students. So there's so much to be mindful of, to be listening for. And like you're saying, when people say, well, what can I do? It sounds like reaching out to your representatives is the most important thing you can do at this time. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's an app called 5 Calls that you can download. And, the premise is, they make it as easy as possible. You kind of just input your information and then, you're able to kind of get connected, a script, it makes it easy. Right. And their whole thing is like, look, yeah, you can like and tweet and Facebook, but like the most effective way, as Amanda pointed out, is that phone call. Even if you're in California, it is important. They need to hear, right? Because, no news is good news. And so you want your representatives to hear, no, actually, you know what? I care that you guys are, doing this or not doing this, because then it is something that the senators can use when they go back. Well, I heard from, 1,200 of my constituents and, they're saying that let's look into it. That's how we've been able to kind of see different Democrats, and I will say Democrats because, that's who's at the forefront of having these kind of inviting advocates and people of the sort to speak to Congress so that they are getting the information, straight, from the horse's mouth.
And I will say a lot of what we've talked about the last couple of months has really been on the defensive, saying, say no to this bill, say no to reconciliation, say no to this, right? But congressional Democrats, Republicans, or Democrats, anyone in blue states also has the power to propose new legislation. And they could propose legislation. And I know that there has been talks and some working to try to propose bills that would protect the federal Department of Education. There's been a lot of push to try to reauthorize the IDEA to include some of these discretionary funds so that they are protected. So it's not just about make sure you say no on this, but it's also, what are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
It's not enough anymore to have a Democrat or any legislator just say, no, I'm not going to support this. What are you doing to make sure that education is on the forefront and something that we are actually moving forward, not just keeping the status quo?
Right.
And I think at even a smaller level as well is just reaching out to other parents in your child's classroom, building that support and network and village, that this mentality of being American is you pick yourself up by the bootstraps and you do it all on your own. No, false. We have not gotten this far in this fight, which feels like 10 years, and it's only been a few months of the Trump presidency, on our own. We've done it because we have, gone to I've referenced our networks. If you want to get involved and see where, your donations go to, the Council of Parents, Attorneys, and Advocates, COPA, is what we are part of. We had our big national conference in March, and it really kind of helped keep us inspired, because doing this work and seeing the attack on our sometimes most vulnerable, and that's all children, is hard. And so being able to reach out to people like you, and to donating to the NAACP, who are bringing those court cases, COPA as well as bringing court cases, and providing research and data, and really, if all you can do in your capacity is to reach out to another parent to, help create this awareness and this exposure of the devastation that will ensue to all children, I think is really important. And I get it. It's hard. It's hard to wake up and see that we're going to do a dictator parade for somebody's birthday. It's like, oh my God, right? But I think being able to kind of hold on to that group that can really take the weight off of your shoulders a little bit. Hey, yeah, I have a kid with autism too, and it is really challenging. And maybe we can, talk to the principal together about, Autism Awareness Month. I know that that's how one of my clients was able to get it, at their school, just like, any other month. And it just starts with those little conversations.
Yeah. And I was going to ask about that, whether having parents get together and have conversations with officials at their school and their school district about how do these changes impact the students, that you serve, and, what are you going to do to support them moving forward? I think that's an important conversation to have as well.
Absolutely. Because even though the executive orders against DEI try to paint the narrative that this is illegal, you can't do it, legal scholars, and there's a lot of lawsuits that are challenging it, have said, no, these programs are 100% within the authority of the law. In fact, laws like the IDEA require it. Inclusion is required. It is a huge component of a free, appropriate public education. So by parents going to their local school even and saying, I believe you have a right to keep this program. Please keep this program. Please stand up. Even if you live in a red state, that school has power. The school district has power. The school board has power. Show up to school board meetings. And even if you can't do that, like Vickie said, having those conversations with other parents and saying, well, can we all send an email to the principal and say, we want to keep this program, can do a lot.
This is such great information. I feel like we could just talk for another hour because I just think people hear a lot of information and, it's hard to digest all of it all at once. And you've both done such a great job of helping us to better understand what's happening right now. And I know listeners are going to want to get in touch with you. I'm going to put links to the 5 Calls app and the other sources that you mentioned. And also I want to put a link to how people can get in touch with you. What is the best way for people to reach you?
Probably either social media or our website, inclusiveeducationproject.org. It does have our podcast on the website and social media. We've been adding a bunch of videos to explain little bits. And so if anything we talked about today, people want to dive deeper into those topics, we have some videos, we have some graphics, there's a lot of information out there. And so we try to kind of go through it, weed through it and post the most relevant ones, because it's easy to doom scroll and say, I'm hearing about something every day. So we've really been trying to narrow it down. Like if you don't see us posting about something, maybe it's not time to panic about that yet. So yeah, and people can always DM us on Instagram as well.
Yes. And I highly, highly recommend your podcast and your Instagram. You share such great information. It actually helps to calm a lot of parents down who, are trying to, are freaking out about some of the things that they're hearing. And so I can't thank you enough for speaking with me and for helping our listeners unpack what is happening at this time, how it impacts families, and what we can do. So thank you again. Grateful to you both for not only being here, but for all the work that you do on a day-to-day basis to stand up and speak out and speak up for families. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Karen.
Thank you so much for joining me today. If you found this conversation informative and helpful, please share it. Let's ensure that civil rights, disability rights, educational equity, and mental health remain priorities and not afterthoughts. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.